and Sabah Chief Minister Tun Fuad Stephens. According to the report, Sabah Air was essentially operating illegally. The airline had submitted the draft of its operations manual towards the end of 1975, but this was never approved by the then Civil Aviation Department, CAD.
Taking into account a singularly poor operation by Sabah Air and a failure on the part of the CAD to fulfill their obligations as the local certification authority, the report said an accident was bound to happen sooner or later. It stated that there were a number of inaccuracies in the operation of the aircraft, which deviated from the flight manual and prevented optimum performance in operations. Meanwhile, the report described the pilot of the flight, Captain Gandhinathan, as a pilot of substandard ability, despite having some 3,000 hours of flying time behind him. A study of his personal file by Sabah Air revealed several shortcomings, including a poor ability to deal with simulated emergencies and control of the aircraft on one engine. The report also found that the aircraft was overloaded, making it tail-heavy and unbalanced, a finding similar to that of the Malaysian investigation report into the incident. Malaysia's report was released under the Official Secrets Act earlier this month, after Tan Sri Haris Muhammad Saleh, who became Chief Minister of Sabah the day after the crash, won a High Court order on March 8th for the government to release it within 3 months.
Mask mandates may return for students due to concerns over the highly transmissible COVID-19 variant Arcturus. Health Minister Dr. Zaleha Mustafa says she will meet with Education Minister Fadlina Siddiq this week to discuss measures to prevent an outbreak in schools.
Zaleha said new SOPs will be issued before schools reopen on May 2nd. She added that it was an important preventive measure due to the possibility of students getting infected while travelling during the festive season. However, Zaleha said the final decision on the proposal would lie with the Education Ministry. On Monday, the Health Ministry revealed that 12 cases of the Arcturus variant have been reported in Malaysia. 6 cases were detected in Sarawak, 4 in Selangor and 2 in Kuala Lumpur. However, Zaleha said those infected by the strain, which is a subvariant of Omicron, only suffered mild symptoms and were in stable condition.
Will existing vaccines still work to provide protection against the new Arcturus subvariant? Public health specialist Dr. Farhan Rusli discusses the need for a booster dose, particularly the bivalent vaccine, to protect against the newest variant.
So when you talk about immunity, especially about new vaccines such as COVID, you don't really know how long the immunity levels are to the most optimum. It can be a year, it can be 2 years, it can be 3 years. And what's more interesting is that it differs between individuals. For some people, it may last longer. For some people, it may last much lesser. And for some, it may not create the immune boost that you would want it to create. So even if you've gotten the vaccine, you may not have the immunity. And that's why we have this agenda of pushing for the booster doses. Now, the booster doses, the new ones that's out, are the bivalent, which means that they are not only covering one sort of the virus, but it covers 2 different sorts. That's why it's called bivalent. And it shows a very high resistance to the Omicron strain, which is what's being widespread right now. If you are okay to take an influenza vaccine every year, knowing that the strains change and what you've gotten last year doesn't cover for what is going to come for the next year, you can apply the same thing towards COVID. If you understand the principles of basic immunology, the basic principles of vaccination, then you would be able to grasp the idea of why the boosters are actually needed and why it's actually necessary. And this is the message that the Ministry of Health must drive. It must not stop driving this message over and over again.
Farhan also addresses health doubts and fears surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine, comparing the risk to over-the-counter drugs in the market.
In any sort of medication, regardless, even paracetamol, Panadol, right, there are risks that are associated with it, albeit however small, but it occurs in some small part of the population. Now, there is no one safety drug that is safe for all. There's none. It doesn't exist in the world. But the amount of risk that you take while you actually get the vaccination is so much lesser comparison to getting COVID in the end.
The Penang South Islands project has been given the final approval by federal environmental regulators. Chief Minister Chow Kon Yeow says the approval was given by the Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change Ministry with 71 conditions to be fulfilled under an elaborate environmental management plan. Chow said with the approval letter dated April 11th, Penang would reclaim all 3 islands under the project, although work would only start on the first island on the coast next to the Bayan Lepas airport runway. The 10 billion ringgit project is a state government initiative to fund the 46 billion ringgit Penang Transport Master Plan through reclamation of the 3 islands covering 1,620 hectares of Pematang Damar Laut. The project has faced fierce opposition from fishermen and environmentalists over concerns that it would adversely affect marine life. The controversial reclamation project had undergone a comprehensive process regarding its environmental impact assessment report, which was approved in June 2019, but there was an appeal until the decision was overturned. A new report was submitted in April last year. 2 Petro-Saudi managers have been indicted in Switzerland on the suspicion that they helped misappropriate $1.8 billion from 1MDB. The Swiss Attorney General's office says the 2, who were not named, face charges of fraud, criminal mismanagement and money laundering.
A statement from the Attorney General said the 2 accused had cooperated with fugitive businessman Lo Tek Jo, better known as Jolo, to set up a joint venture for a fake project in Turkmenistan, which would end up defrauding 1MDB. This led the Wealth Fund's board to agree to transfer $1 billion for the joint venture, of which $700 million was diverted to a Swiss bank account in the name of a company owned by Lo. Of the $700 million, Lo transferred $85 million to one accused, who in turn transferred $33 million to the other. The funds received by the duo were used to purchase property in Switzerland and London, jewellery and private equity to develop Petro-Saudi's activities. Meanwhile, the remaining $300 million was transferred to Petro-Saudi for its benefit. In addition, Lo also convinced the 1MDB board to approve the transfer of a further $830 million as part of an Islamic loan that followed the joint venture. It remains unclear when the case will go on trial.
We'll take a quick break. Stay tuned for more.
Jauh tak kurasa, karena hatiku melonjak sama, ingin berjumpa sanak saudara yang selalu bermain di mata. Not menghijau, langit dan tinggi bertapak, seru angin turut sama berlalu, semuanya bagaikan turut gembira. Semua wajah yang ku sayang, satu-satu tersemat di kalbu, pasti terubat rindu di hati, menyambut kepulanganku nanti. Boy, oke deh. Adik mana depan nih? Aha, oh ini peset baru punya style nih. Ketika raya-raya kita gembira.
Welcome back. All 30 Malaysians who were stranded in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, have safely left for Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The Foreign Ministry says the evacuees had boarded a Saudi Arabian Navy vessel from Sudan port. The journey across the Red Sea is expected to take at least 12 hours. In a statement, Wisma Putra said it also assisted in evacuations for nationals from Cambodia, Palestine, Philippines, Singapore, Sudan, Thailand, and the US. It added that this was carried out under the close supervision of the Malaysian evacuation operation. Violence broke out in the capital between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces on April 15th. Since then, the clashes have killed over 460 people and injured more than 3,500 others. A ceasefire in Sudan is partially holding, but there are no signs that the warring parties are ready to negotiate to end the fighting. UN envoy to Sudan, Volker Perthes, told a UN Security Council meeting that both sides in the conflict believe they can secure a victory.
This is a miscalculation. As fighting continues, law and order will further break down throughout the country, and command and control will dissipate. Sudan could become increasingly fragmented, which would have a devastating impact on the region. And even if one side wins, Sudan will lose.
The Sudan Armed Forces and Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire from Tuesday, following negotiations mediated by the US and Saudi Arabia. However, Perthes said fighting and movement of troops were still reported in key areas of the capital. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that the fighting could spread to other countries in the region. The UN has moved hundreds of staff and family members from Khartoum to Port Sudan, where it plans to establish a hub to continue working in the country.
Singapore has executed a man convicted of drug trafficking despite pleas for clemency from his family and activists. 46-year-old Tangaraju Supia was hanged at dawn over a plot to smuggle 1 kilogram of cannabis from Malaysia to Singapore in 2013, double the threshold for the death penalty in the country.
On Tuesday, Singapore's courts had rejected a last-minute appeal from Tangaraju's family against his conviction. Activists also said he had been convicted on weak evidence and had limited legal access during his prosecution. Singapore's stringent drug laws have drawn criticism from various parties, including British tycoon Richard Branson, a well-known opponent of the death penalty. He said Tangaraju's sentence did not meet the standards for a criminal conviction because he was nowhere near the drugs when he was arrested. In response, the Singapore government said Branson was peddling falsehoods and disrespecting the country's judicial system, adding that the courts had spent more than 3 years reviewing the case. Tangaraju's case marked Singapore's first execution this year. The city-state executed 11 people in 2022 and has continued to argue that the death penalty is an effective deterrent to drug crime.
The Taliban have killed the mastermind behind the deadly suicide bombing outside the Kabul airport in August 2021. According to US officials, the Islamic State leader was killed weeks ago, but it took time to confirm his death.
US officials added that the leader's death had been determined through intelligence gathering and surveillance of the region where he died. They gave no further details about how they learned he was responsible for the bombing, nor did they name the ISIS leader. The explosion at the entrance to Hamid Karzai International Airport in 2021 killed around 170 Afghans and 13 US servicemen. A suicide bomber walked into a huge crowd that had gathered in the area, hoping to be evacuated as US troops withdrew from Afghanistan. The attack came hours after Western governments warned their citizens to stay away from Kabul International Airport, citing the imminent threat of an attack by ISIS-K, the Afghan branch of the Islamic State group.
A Japanese company confirmed its spacecraft has likely crashed while attempting to land on the moon. It lost contact moments before touchdown as flight controllers scrambled to determine what happened.
After more than 6 hours of lost communication, Tokyo-based iSpace announced that the Hakuto R Mission 1 lander had most likely crashed into the moon after unexpectedly accelerating. iSpace said in a statement that final data before the planned touchdown showed the lander's speed increasing rapidly. Senior engineers at Mission Control in Tokyo then determined that a successful landing was not possible. A lunar landing would have been ambitious for a startup like iSpace. Only 3 governments have successfully landed on the moon: Russia, the US, and China. An Israeli non-profit organization attempted to land on the moon in 2019, but its spacecraft was destroyed on impact.
That wraps up AWANI tonight. I'm Cynthia Ng. Thank you for watching and good night.